Imagine standing in the shadow of the towering Sierra Nevada mountains back in the 1850s, where the wind howls like a pack of wolves, and the snow can swallow a man whole in a single night. And there's this one guy, John Thompson, fresh off the boat from Norway, who's decided to build not just any cabin, but something his neighbors call a double cabin, a bizarre two-story beast with a massive stone hearth in the middle, reinforced floors that could hold an elephant, and get this, a door on the second floor 10 feet up in the air. Like he's expecting the ground to vanish or something? And while everyone else is slapping together simple log huts that hug the earth to stay warm, John's out there hauling extra timber, stacking logs upon logs, creating what looks like a fortress against an invisible enemy. And the locals, tough miners and ranchers who've seen their share of hard winters. They can't stop laughing, pointing fingers and whispering that he's wasting precious resources on a fool's dream, calling him Snowshoe behind his back because of those weird long skis he straps on. But little do they know, John's not crazy. He's remembering the brutal blizzards of his Norwegian childhood where entire villages could get buried alive, and he's building for survival, not show, pouring his sweat into a design that's part insulation genius and part sheer defiance against nature. S-Rap. And as the autumn leaves turn and the first flurries dust the peaks, the mockery only grows louder. With families like the Millers down the valley shaking their heads and betting he'll abandon that monstrosity before the first real storm hits. But John just smiles quietly, stocking his upper floor with smoked meats, barrels of water, stacks of dry wood, and thick wool blankets, knowing deep in his bones that something big is coming, something that will turn those laughs into desperate pleas for help. Now, let us rewind a bit to understand who this John Thompson really was. Born in 1827 in a tiny Norwegian village where winters meant months of darkness and snowdrifts taller than houses. He sailed to America at age 10 with his family, chasing the gold rush dreams that lured so many to California, but instead of striking it rich in the mines, he found his calling crossing the treacherous Sierra passes on those homemade skis, delivering mail when no one else dared, skiing up to 90 miles in 3 days with a 100-pound pack on his back, through avalanches and whiteouts that would kill lesser men, earning him the nickname Snowshoe Thompson for real this time. And by the time he settled near Placerville in the 1850s, he'd seen enough frozen corpses and collapsed roofs to know that standard American cabins were cut out for the Sierra's fury. So he innovated, drawing from old-world techniques like sod houses and thermal buffering, creating his double cabin with an air pocket between walls filled with sawdust for insulation, a central hearth that radiated heat upward like a natural furnace, and that elevated entrance to escape if the snow piled too high. And while neighbors like the Millers built low and wide, relying on sheer luck and a hot fire to get through winter, John prepared for the worst, hunting extra game, chopping wood until his hands blistered, and even practicing digging air vents in mock snowbanks, all while enduring the jeers that echoed across the valley. But as the skies darkened in late winter, a low-pressure system brewing over the Pacific, whispers of an unusual cold front started circulating, and John felt it in the air, that prickling sense of doom that made him double-check his supplies one last time. But what no one could predict was just how monstrous this storm would become. It started innocently enough, a few fat flakes on a Tuesday afternoon in 1867, but by nightfall, the wind picked up, whipping snow into a frenzy that blinded anyone foolish enough to step outside. And as the hours ticked by, the accumulation mounted, 3 feet overnight, then 5 more the next day, drifts climbing like living things up the sides of trees and buildings, temperatures plunging to bone-chilling lows where exposed skin froze in minutes, and the valley transformed into a white hell where visibility dropped to zero, and the constant roar drowned out even your own thoughts. Roofs creaking under tons of weight, chimneys clogging with ice, forcing families to choose between freezing or risking carbon monoxide poisoning by keeping fires low. And out there, in the chaos, John's double cabin stood like a sentinel, its lower level slowly burying, but the upper stories safe and warm, the hearth pumping heat that didn't escape through the floor, thanks to that reinforced design. And as the third day dawned with no end in sight, he peered out his high window at the bared world below, wondering if his neighbors' laughter had turned to fear yet, and if they'd survive long enough for him to prove them wrong. What happened next would turn John from a mocked outsider into a valley legend. But you, have to stick around to hear how one man's folly became the lifeline for an entire community. As the blizzard raged into its 4th day, the Sierra Nevada Valley had become unrecognizable. A vast ocean of snow where familiar landmarks like fence posts and barns vanished under drifts that towered 20 feet high in places. And the wind, oh that relentless wind, it screamed through the pines like 1,000 banjos, hurling ice pellets that stung like bee stings and piled snow against doors until they would budge an inch. trapping families inside their homes with dwindling wood supplies and the constant dread of their roofs. Caving in under the unimaginable pressure, some structures are already cracking with sounds like thunderclaps in the night. And in the Miller cabin, 3 miles from John's, the family of 5 huddled around a sputtering fire, their walls sweating with condensation that froze into icy sheets, the air thick with smoke because the chimney was half blocked, and little Annie Miller, just 7 years old, coughed endlessly from the fumes while her parents rationed the last logs, praying for a break in the storm that showed no signs of letting up. Their laughter at John's double cabin, now a bitter memory as they realized too late that his mad design might have been the smartest thing anyone ever built in these mountains. And across the valley, other homesteaders faced similar horrors. Cattle freezing solid in their pens, water sources buried deep, and the isolation amplifying every fear until panic set in, with some venturing out only to get lost in the whiteout, their bodies not found until spring thaw. Meanwhile, up in his double cabin, John Thompson was a world apart from the desperation below his upper floor. Accessed by that scoffed-at second-story door, remained dry and toasty. The massive stone hearth he built from river rocks drawing heat from a carefully tended fire that burned efficiently on the pre-stocked wood, the flames licking up without wasting energy on the buried lower level, which acted as a natural buffer against the cold seeping from the ground. And with his supplies laid out like a soldier's rations, jerky, hardtack, melted snow for water, he could afford to wait out the storm in relative comfort, even brewing coffee on the hearth to keep his spirits high. And as the days blurred together, he used the time to mend gear and plan, knowing from his mail-carrying exploits that blizzards like this could last a week or more. Heskey's propped by the door, ready for action, and it was on the third night, amid the howling gale, that he first heard it, or rather, did Ewan hear it? The eerie silence from the valley where chimney smoke should rise and distant axes chop, signaling that his neighbors might be in trouble, buried alive in their single-level tombs, unable to signal for help or even breathe fresh air if their vents clogged. And John, ever the stoic Norwegian, felt a pull in his gut, a sense of duty forged from years of braving the passers, alone, deciding that if anyone could reach them, it was him, with his snowshoes and unbreakable will. Strapping on his 10-foot skis, crafted from oak and curve at the tips like Viking lawn, John stepped out his elevated door onto the snowpack that now leveled with it, gliding effortlessly over the buried landscape where walking would mean sinking to your waist, or worse. And as he pulled through the tempest, visibility barely an arm's length, he navigated by memory and the faint outlines of treetops poking through like drowned fingers. His heavy coat, crusted with ice, but his core warm from exertion, and after what felt like hours, but was probably less, he reached the Miller place, or what was left visible, just a mound with a protruding chimney tip, no smoke rising, and John's heart pounded as he dug frantically with his hands and a small shovel from his pack, clearing the chimney until he heard muffled voices below. The family alive but weakened, their fire out. The cabin a freezing cave where hypothermia was setting in fast. And over the next 48 hours, he made multiple trips, ferrying wood, food, and blankets from his own stores, teaching them how to poke air holes and bank snow against walls for extra insulation. All while the blizzard showed no mercy, winds shifting to bury paths he'd just cleared. And by the 6th day, exhausted but unbroken, John had saved not just the Millers, but to other families, pulling children to safety on his back like a human sled, his double cabin serving as a central hub where the rescued could warm up before returning to fortify their homes. But as the 7th day approached, with clouds finally thinning, a new danger loomed, the thaw that could trigger avalanches and floods, testing John's ingenuity once more, leaving you wondering if his legend would end in triumph or tragedy. With the blizzard's grip finally loosening on the 7th day, the sun pierced through the ragged clouds like a long-lost friend, casting a dazzling glare over the transformed Sierra Valley where snowdrifts sculpted bizarre shapes around buried wagons and fences, carried the faint sounds of cracking ice and distant moans from weakening structures. But for John Thompson, emerging from his double cabin that stood proud amid the white expanse, the real work was just beginning, assessing the damage, helping neighbors dig out, and dealing with the aftermath of a storm that had claimed livestock by the dozens, and left the community in shock. Their single-story homes now revealed as half-buried igloos with caved-in roofs and flooded interiors from melting snow, while John's place, with its elevated design and thermal smarts, showed not a single crack. The lower level is only shoveled out once the drifts receded, proving that his folly was just survival gear, but a blueprint for living in harmony with the mountain's fury. And his word spread of his rescues, skiing through zero visibility to deliver life-saving supplies, sharing his stockpiles without a grudge against those who'd mocked him. The laughter turned to awe, with families like the Millers publicly thanking him at a makeshift gathering, admitting their low cabins had nearly become their graves, and vowing to rebuild with double walls and high entrances inspired by his aching back. This wasn't just any storm. Historians now call it one of the great Sierra blizzards of the 1860s, part of a series that dumped record snowfalls and tested the limits of human endurance in the American West. Starvation and avalanches, but in John's Little Valley, 0 lives lost. A miracle attributed to one man's foresight, and his life after the blizzard only amplified his legend for 20 years. He carried the U.S. mail across the Sierras on skis when stagecoaches and trains couldn't, covering 90-mile routes in half the time, singing Norwegian folk songs to keep wolves at bay, surviving falls into crevasses and weeks without shelter, all unpaid by the government until years later when petitions forced them to compensate his widow after his death at age 49 from pneumonia, with miners and settlers adopting similar insulated designs that saved countless lives in subsequent winters, turning what was once seen as eccentricity into standard wisdom. And today, statues of Snowshoe Thompson stand in California parks. Ski resorts bear his name. So, there you have it, the incredible true tale of how one immigrant's double cabin turned mockery into myth during a blizzard that could have wiped out a community, showing that sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that keep us alive. If this story of grit and genius hooked you like it did me, hit that like button. Subscribe for more forgotten history gems that prove the past is full of lessons for today. And drop a comment below. What's the wildest survival hack you've heard of? Let's keep the conversation going, and I'll see you in the next video.